If you own a TV or a set-top box or a subscription service that lets you watch IPL, you know that fantasy leagues exist. And it's not just ads and commercials between overs anymore, it's the title sponsor. And there are a lot of questions around them. Hey guys, my name is Shubham Raheja and you are watching Elemental, where we talk about the smaller things in tech that make a much bigger impact on the real world. This week's topic is fantasy leagues and sports and why there is such a controversy around them. Before we get started, let me quickly remind you to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon so that you know exactly when we put out our latest videos. Before we start talking about fantasy leagues, let's understand how it's different from gambling and real money gaming. Gambling is a state subject in India, but in most states, it works out like this. If a game of chance is being played with stakes, it's called gambling. But if a game of skill is being played with stakes, it's not gambling, it's real money gaming. There's also a two-step process to determine whether a game is that of chance or that of skill. Test 1. A player must be able to choose to lose and should be able to exercise some agency in winning. A game like Snakes and Ladders would lose this test because you only have one game piece, the fate of which is decided by the roll of a dice. No skill, just pure luck. But in Ludo, you have skill, as you have to actively choose which piece to move. The second test says a player's performance must improve over time, consistently and steadily. This is a slightly difficult one to carry out because in real world, one can seldom have a consistent development in performance. But what about fantasy sports? This is what Rishi Alwani, former video games editor for Gadget 360 and the founder of Mako Reactor, had to say about this.
Fantasy leagues is an interesting one because you know how Super Selector used to be, where you'd put together your favorite team and accordingly, if they'd perform well on a given day, you'd win. Now, that is considered to be in some parts of the world as gambling as well, because the element of skill, because some courts of law feel that the element of skill isn't as pronounced as it should be. So, but from an India standpoint, they're all essentially, because of the way the law is, they're all seemingly in the same vague grey bucket of gambling.
Now, if you've been following the news for the last year or so, there have been several instances where fantasy leagues and sports have come into the spotlight, mainly with concerns surrounding their legality. But courts have mostly found in favor of these games. Dream 11 is perhaps one of the best examples of this. In 2019, with regard to a public interest litigation filed by an independent petitioner, the Bombay High Court ruled that Dream 11 is a game of skill and does not involve betting or gambling. It further clarified it by saying that the result of the game does not depend on winning or losing of any particular team in the real world. Although there are court judgments that find fantasy leagues to be games of skill, Google and Apple have both not allowed apps like Dream 11 or Paytm First Games, which allow you to bet real money based on your fantasy league on their stores. And now this has become a bone of contention. To better understand fantasy sports, let's see how you play them. First, you download the Fantasy League app and register yourself using an email address or a social media account. You then select a match you want to participate in. Then, using your knowledge of the sport, pick your favorite players in a team. These players have to belong to different playing roles. Picking these requires you to spend credits and have a credit cap. Then, you should pick the captain and vice captain of the team. The points you receive rely on your fantasy squad, that is how many runs they make and how many catches and wickets they take. The captain will give you twice the points scored by them, while the vice captain will give you 1.5 times the points. You can then select the contests taking place depending on the prize pool and then place your stakes in the form of virtual in-game currency or real money. You would then be later ranked based on these points and accordingly receive distributions from the entry pool. Now in this whole process, you have to make an educated decision on which players to choose. This depends on a lot of factors like having a basic understanding of the rules of the game, the form of the players, and just the overall form of the team and how they have been performing in a season. Now, some players take this to a whole new level by coming up with machine learning algorithms. Now, this looks fancy, but it's not that fancy because it's mainly concerned with predicting the overall outcome of a game and not predicting the performance of a particular player.
So I would say the hardcore broadcasting channels who keep on give their expected lineups and so on do definitely take the skill part out of the game. However, there are some recognized people who are actually contributors who have their own websites and blogs. They are contributors to other fantasy apps as well in terms of expert predictions and all that. They are definitely genuine and they mostly project it as a more of a piece of advice rather than a sure shot way of making money.
While so far it seems like it's a game of skill, there's also an element of chance involved. A well-calculated mathematical guess can be ruined by a stroke of luck, but then again the whole game depends on mathematical guesstimates, doesn't it? Now, there are several people who share their mathematical data with other players. In fact, there are several Telegram groups that actually share entire player selections. If people just copy these recommendations blindly, that takes away the element of skill. Just like if you played chess simply by following rote moves you read about rather than reacting to them in the game in front of you. Now, like any other game or sport that pays, some people would want to take this full time. But does it make sense to do so?
While in India, I doubt there is anyone taking this up full time. There might be a few people, but none of them in the popular domain as compared to other places where there are a lot of FanDuel and drafting, full-time FanDuel and drafting players. So this can be taken up full time as long as the person has a lot of great grasp on math, probability, and has sound knowledge of data science, etc., and can invest a huge amount of time in it.
For the user, it's so that's the thing, right? I mean, what most people fail to understand, it's always a question of the house always wins one way or the other. So probably out of 20 users who put in that amount, maybe one will probably get more than their return. And it kind of makes sense because if you look at the math behind all of this, right? Depending which report you read, you'll hear a situation where the cost of acquiring a user for such a service is in the range of maybe 150 rupees all the way up to 3,000 rupees for someone who keeps coming back and uses such a service. And that's where it's very, I don't think any of them are breaking even at this point. And I think what's most likely is from a user standpoint, to keep people hooked, they may just give them an initial carrot in terms of, okay, here's 20 or 30 rupees more on what you spent, so keep coming back.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Elemental. I know I took a detour on the regular tech stuff, but honestly, it was a lot of fun to research this. Now it's your time to tell me in the comments what you think about fantasy sports. And after you're done with that, let me remind you that new Elemental videos come out every Sunday at 1 PM, so don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And for all things tech, log on to Garage360.com.